Hello and welcome to episode number 57 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Now, Gar, welcome to 2024. We'd like to welcome everybody and wish everybody a happy new year. This is the first episode of a new year, so we're really looking forward to do this. And just to give people a hint of what we're going to be doing today, of course, I'm talking about Woody Woodpecker. So let's get right into it, Gar. What do you remember from, the first time that you saw Woody Woodpecker? What are your memories from that?
Well, okay, this Woody Woodpecker was part of my childhood was in the 1960s.
Sure.
And in the 1960s was the beginnings of Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
For the children and everything. And Woody Woodpecker was a big part of Saturday morning cartoons.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That was where the best of the best was being aired. Not meaning, there was a bunch of other stuff that was going on at other times. But, Saturday morning cartoons was kind of equal to prime time for adults.
I mean, I remember that when I was a kid myself, growing up in the 70s and 80s, every Saturday morning they'd have stuff like Scooby-Doo. In fact, Super Pins. There was so much crap on Saturday mornings that it's like, that's why they started to have VCRs and stuff, because you could not possibly watch it all. And it's like, what the hell, what am I going to watch? But, that was the hardest part of Saturday morning for me.
Well, in the early days in the 60s, it was in its infancy.
Sure.
And it wasn't the Scooby-Doos and it was the Woody Woodpeckers, it was the Hanna-Barbera,
Bugs Bunny.
It was the Bugs Bunny, it was all of that. It was the what everybody, what the younger generation, looks at as like the really old stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The really, really, really old stuff.
And it's funny you bring up Saturday morning.
For me, that old stuff was dominated by slapstick comedy.
Sure.
Where slapstick comedy is, for the audience that doesn't know, is accidental, where accidents become funny.
Yeah.
Where they rely on the visual awkwardness.
Yeah.
Which visual awkwardness comes across as funny if done right.
Yeah, many of these cartoons featured that. A lot of people can go back and look at stuff like the Three Stooges, where stuff like that. Those Three Stooges episodes were full of slapstick stuff, and a lot of what they would find when they started filming TV shows in front of live studio audiences, like for example, the Golden Girls or even All in the Family, is they would things would happen during the filming, and just based on the way the audience reacted, they didn't know the audience was going to react to a certain line in the script that way, and they thought, oh, wait a minute, there's a joke. Yeah, and that's how that stuff would come up. Now, I should go on to let people know, Woody Woodpecker, who we're talking about today, is an animated cartoon character who appeared in theatrical short films between 1940 and 1972. The short films were distributed by Universal Films and produced by Walter Lantz, who was Woody's creator. Now, like you were talking, Gar, many of these Saturday morning cartoons, you had stuff like, the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, the Warner Brothers cartoons, and as a child, what we did not realize, like you're saying, for example, with Hanna-Barbera, that was one studio that produced all those great classic cartoons, but as a child, you don't realize, hey, there's one studio making all these great cartoons that we love, and very much like Walter Lantz, who was Woody Woodpecker's creator and created Woody Woodpecker, he had his own studio where the cartoons were made and filmed. He had more than just Woody Woodpecker. He had these other cartoon characters that existed even before Woody Woodpecker in the 1940s. So that's another thing people kind of got to realize when we're talking about something like Woody Woodpecker.
Well, I think you touched on something that shows a transitional period also, because these cartoons were primarily shown
in
as
theaters,
fillers in theaters to keep the audience kind of entertained in the in-betweens.
Yeah, like
so that's where Walter Lantz's studio actually was, designed to fulfill, and then the 50s started hitting, and then we're talking about a transitional, because Hanna-Barbera and all of that stuff was really
new
not during the 40s.
Yeah.
Walter Lantz was during a time period previous to Hanna-Barbera, before Hanna-Barbera ever existed. And then the rock stars for the voice, for the voiceovers from the 40s just naturally migrated over to these studios. Walter Lantz was kind of one of those transitional studios that transitioned from the movies to TV.
Yeah, and what's interesting in doing the research for today's episode is very much, it was about a year ago we did an episode on Felix the Cat, who, during that episode we talked about Felix the Cat was like, many historians claim like maybe the first really successful cartoon character. And if you go back, look at like Felix the Cat was originally black and white. It looked very different than modern day Felix, but it had its evolution, as you say. I mean, Felix the Cat, for example, dates all the way back to 1919, and I bring that up because Woody Woodpecker doesn't appear until like 1940, Gar, and I have a Woody Woodpecker like 2-volume DVD set of these classic Woody Woodpecker cartoons I was watching last night, prepping for today's episode, and it's interesting watching them because it's kind of like they're old and grainy, but they got that classic appearance, if you know what I mean. And it's just because that was the technology. That's how they made the cartoons back then. But it was just so fun to be watching these old cartoons last night, preparing for today's episode.
Well, and I think it's so perfection in how Walter Lantz created that laugh to mimic a real woodpecker's call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the laugh is based on the actual sound of how a real woodpecker makes a call to its mate or communicates to other woodpeckers.
In fact, that
to me, that's genius. That little choice right there is genius.
Yeah, in fact, he was a cartoonist before Woody Woodpecker, and all these other cartoons that he created. But what's interesting, I was reading the kind of a thought, the idea for Woody Woodpecker came when him and his wife were on their honeymoon, and they had a cabin somewhere, and it was raining and stuff. It was a real bad rainstorm, and there was a woodpecker that was kind of pecking on the roof of their cabin, and it caused a leak. And the woodpecker and the noise was just driving Walter Lantz crazy. And his wife suggested, "Hey, you should create like a cartoon animated woodpecker." And that's kind of the story they tell of how the idea for Woody originated.
Yeah, but you missed one detail. Walter Lantz wanted to kill the wood.
Yeah.
Which is the birth of the insanity side of the character. Because that's basically what that woodpecker was doing, was driving Walter Lantz nuts.
Yeah. And it's he's got many other great cartoon characters, but let's be honest, Woody Woodpecker is kind of he was the most successful. He something about Woody Woodpecker people just loved, and kind of like when I did the introduction to today's show. I mean, there's no doubt what I'm talking about. I mean, every Woody Woodpecker cartoon starts with that laugh, and we know what it is. And you're talking about famous voice actors at the time. And again, when we're watching these cartoons as kids, we have no idea that Mel Blanc, for example, does many of these voices in some of these classic cartoons that we grew up on, because he does the voice of Daffy Duck and for example, and Bugs Bunny, but they're different voices. You can't tell it's the same guy. That's kind of the professional that this guy was. And I bring Mel Blanc up because he became very successful, like animator and voiceover person at the time, because he did many of these classic cartoons, as I mentioned. He was very successful at one point that he brought the idea to do the Grinch Stole Christmas, the original animated TV version of that. We did an episode recently on that. And so a lot of these guys in Hollywood were involved in many other projects, you know?
Well, you know, you got to work.
Yeah, you got to work.
Basically, that's all they were thinking, is they were just looking for more jobs.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting because I was reading Woody Woodpecker's first appearance was in the short Knock Knock on November 25th, 1940. The cartoon featured Andy Panda and his father, Papa Panda, two other cartoon characters that were famous at the time who were also created by Walter Lantz. In Knock Knock, though...
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Up to that point, the pandas were his top characters.
Yeah.
Top animated characters.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Woody Woodpecker was only supposed to be just a one-off, just bit part, you know, thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was not in the plans. It was just a side character.
And basically what I was reading about that is just his appearance in this one cartoon, way the audience reacted. He's like, okay, we got to make this a more featured character. And then the rest, as they say, is history. In Knock Knock, though, it was Woody Woodpecker, as you said, that viewers really took notice of, Gar. Woody Woodpecker was originally voiced by famed voice actor Mel Blanc. Now, Mel Blanc did the voice of Woody only for the first three Woody Woodpecker cartoons, but Blanc went on to work exclusively with Warner Brothers cartoons, where he was signed to a loyalty contract saying, okay, we want you to work exclusively with Warner Brothers, and part of your contract you're going to sign, you can't work with any other studios. Now, he was able to do record like Woody Woodpecker themed albums and stuff, and music like for the studio, but he could not work on any of the cartoons. And so again, he's very successful, but he had to sign a loyalty contract, so they had to get somebody else to voice Woody.
Yeah, and there was a unique part of that was that was the only character that he started where Mel Blanc was replaced.
Yeah.
By another person was doing the character that he established at the same time that he was alive and working on other projects.
Yeah.
There was no other character that he had worked on that was still going at the same time while he was still going.
Yeah. Very interesting part of the story. And it said after the success of Knock Knock, and of course that's the very first cartoon to feature Woody Woodpecker, Walter Lantz realized he had a real star in Woody Woodpecker who would go on to be more popular than another one of Lantz's cartoon characters, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. That was kind of one of his original cartoons. And at the time, in the 1940s, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was kind of waning in popularity. So he's like, I gotta create something new to keep people interested in the in our studio and what we're doing. And Woody Woodpecker kind of became that, you know.
Yes. Woody Woodpecker became Walter Lantz's rock star.
Sure. Again, if you go back to those original Woody Woodpecker cartoons, I mean, the very first ones, like from the 1940s, Woody Woodpecker was much more kind of raw, kind of really insane, like that, and he just kind of do crazy things throughout the cartoon, and it didn't really matter. But later on, they'd bring other people to work on the Woody Woodpecker cartoons, and the later, like kind of as Woody Woodpecker would start to evolve, look a little different, look more like a Disney character. He was a little more calm. He still had his wild ways, but he wouldn't just go insane for no reason. So there was kind of that evolution of Woody, like all these cartoon characters we've talked about.
Well, you know, everybody's always got new ideas.
Yeah.
You know, And just like Walter Lantz was realizing that his character's popularity was waning, one of the ways that you can keep that from happening is by coming up with things to keep things fresh.
Yeah.
And some of those things are making alterations to
the characters,
the actual, look of the character and stuff like that. And musicians do that too. Say for example, Madonna.
Yeah.
For many years, fashion was part of what was fused into her shows. And so always her shows had a different look.
Yeah.
From one year to the next year to the next year, no tour had the same look, and no tour had the same outfits, no tour had the same theme. They changed everything up to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, and we got
So that's just like musicians do that with their shows to keep things fresh.
Yeah.
When you keep things fresh, it gives you longevity.
Sure.
You know what I mean? There's a reason for some people. If somebody saw you last year in the tour, now there's a new reason for you to come to see the new tour.
Yeah.
And just like that again, with Woody Woodpecker, that's what they were doing, giving people a reason to keep watching it.
Yeah, and,
you know what I mean?
And I got to be honest, when we're kids watching these cartoon Gars, you're not really aware of this evolution that goes on. You might, it looks a little different, but like I even doing the research for today's episode, I went online and I found some old photos I'm going to post with this of Woody Woodpecker, like from the 1940s, and you can definitely see a difference in Woody from the 1940s versus the 1970s Woody, and it's just that evolution. It wasn't so obvious so when we were watching, but you go back and you look at these old photos, and you can tell, okay, there's definitely that evolution. And we got to remind people listening to this that let's not forget the 1940s is World War II era, and so it said during that time that Woody's brash kind of spunky attitude was very popular with people during the World War II era because, again, watching these cartoons, and seeing them before the movies when you go to the theater, it was something fun to watch,
Well, but also, looking at it this way, the Jerry Lewis's and the Don Knotts of that time period were human characters that had wackiness and craziness and unpredictability to their characters. So, and also, the wacky, crazy unpredictability also is a perfect vehicle for slapstick comedy.
Yeah, it really.
You know what I mean? You need to have an element of unpredictability for slapstick to work.
And I was reading, believe it or not, Gar, the other thing about bringing up the fact that the 1940s when Woody first appeared was World War II era. Because of that, I was reading that Woody was like really popular at that time, and that's important because they said like in many of the military, like on some military things, Woody was painted on the side of some of the Air Force planes and stuff like that. So again, I think that's just a great example of showing not only how popular a character became, but that's a point when this has kind of reached that level of pop culture where this character really means something, to many people that they would take the time to paint it on an Air Force plane,
Well, it's a reminder to everyone in the service as to what they are fighting for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, whoever came up with the idea of doing the graphics on the plane, that's another stroke of genius.
Yeah, and it says the 1943 film, The Dizzy Acrobat, was even up for an Academy Award. Now, the Dizzy Acrobat is actually a Woody Woodpecker cartoon, and I bring this up because in doing the research and as I'm reading it, I think, wow, I can't imagine, back in the 1940s, can you even imagine a Woody Woodpecker cartoon being up for an Academy Award? Of course, it lost out to a Tom and Jerry cartoon, but I mean, as we're watching these cartoons growing up, I mean, to find out that cartoons like that is actually, nominated for an Academy Award blew my mind,
Well, and Tom and Jerry, was really a much more violent cartoon.
Yeah.
Where basically Woody Woodpecker's was based on his craziness and just being out of control. But Tom and Jerry was during that same time period. But that really Tom and Jerry were basically a cartoon just loaded with two characters that are just waging war against each other. And because of that, when I was a child, that never really interested me. That there just seemed to be an anger element to Tom and Jerry that I as a child I was never attracted to that kind of anger. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
To me, it came across as angry, and it didn't come across as funny. Watching somebody else get hurt really bad, to me, I didn't see the funniness in it. And so I never really watched Tom and Jerry cartoons.
Now let me ask you, Gar. Yeah, let me ask you, Gar. We were mentioning like slapstick earlier in some of these cartoons and stuff, and even stuff like I got to ask, were you a fan of stuff like the Three Stooges, where the guys would kind of hit each other over the head, and they didn't really get.
As a child, no.
Okay.
As a child, no. But as a child, I do remember watching Spanky and Our Gang.
Yeah.
With alfalfa and all those. As a child, I gravitated towards that. I never really did. When I got older. Yeah. Then, say teen years and stuff like that, then, that had much more of an appeal to me. But as a child, I'd say I was too young
to understand it,
I don't think children were watching the Three Stooges.
No.
At that time.
No.
You know what I mean? It wasn't really even marketed towards children. It was more considered adult comedy.
Okay, and then I was reading The Beech Nut, which was the 11th cartoon in the Woody Woodpecker cartoon collection, which was theatrically released on October 16th, 1944. Is a cartoon that first introduced Woody's original chief nemesis, which was, remember Wally Walrus?
Yes.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember, but I remember.
It said in 1946, Woody's wild days were numbered when Walter Lantz hired Disney veteran animator and film director Dick Landry to direct Woody's cartoons. Dick Landry was credited as one of Donald Duck's creators, and that's important because if you kind of look at the Woody Woodpecker kind of from the 1970s, he kind of had that look like some of the Disney characters, and that's because the guy they brought on to direct the Woody cartoons and animate them at that time, he previously worked at Disney. And he was there long enough but he was actually a guy credited as one of the co-creators of Donald Duck. So that's a pretty big land for Walter Lantz to come work at his studio.
Yeah, and it really did add the show was already
popular,
very well established, but it just added a slick professional veneer to what they were doing. You know what I mean? It was. It's just, made it. He added a more refined touch.
In fact, it was Dick Landry who kind of told Walter Lantz, okay, we can still have Woody kind of do his wacky laugh and kind of go crazy, but he's not going to be insane all the time, just going crazy for no reason. There's got to be a reason behind it, and you kind of would start to notice that in some of the later cartoons.
Well, whether that reason or not, it was the crazy, unpredictably roller coaster ride of a character that attracted me. As a child, you know what I mean? You just never knew what he was going to do next.
And here's the thing, Gar. And talking about animated cartoons, I mean, I'm sure like myself and many others, first time you see Woody Woodpecker, you're not really sure what the hell's a woodpecker, right? And then you find out, okay, it's a bird. But that's the cool thing about watching animation. It doesn't even necessarily have to be something that can truly exist or truly happen. A lot of the fun about watching animation, it is all about imagination. What I'm saying, for example, watching a classic episode of the Flintstones. I mean, I remember being in school, learning about dinosaurs, and thinking to myself, man, I wonder what it was like back then when dinosaurs, ruled the earth. And then you watch them like the Flintstones. Oh, okay, well, that's I guess what it could have been like. And so it allows you to kind of escape for a while, escape reality, and kind of go to a never land. And the fact that the fact that Woody's a talking woodpecker, and that really can't happen in life. It doesn't even matter because it allows you to kind of just laugh and have a good time.
Well, he's so damn popular. They even he has a theme park ride.
Yeah.
Over at Universal Studios, they have a Woody Woodpecker ride. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've never been on the ride.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
Neither do I.
But it just seems, if you were ever going to do a ride, because his character was such a roller coaster, his ride would have to be a roller coaster too.
Yeah. And so Dick Landry also felt, okay, it's also important though that Woody maintain the slapstick humor that he was known for. So again, if they were to bring new people in to work on Woody Woodpecker and they want to kind of reinvent Woody Woodpecker, it wouldn't have been successful. But they made like small little changes, but the audience was able to accept it. It wasn't such a harsh change. Very much like when kind of the evolution of Felix the cat, as we were talking about earlier. When Felix finally evolved, like in the 1950s, it wasn't such a harsh change. So people were able to kind of accept it.
Well, slapstick comedy was really big at that time.
Yeah.
And there were over the history of time of TV and movies, there are a lot of comedians that a huge part of their comedy is slapstick.
Oh, sure.
Of course, you Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
Dick Van Dyke. The opening scene. What does he do? He trips over something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The very opening scene where they do the credits when they're first starting the show. He's slapstick. Chevy Chase.
Yeah, sure.
Is another heavy on the slapstick. So there are a lot of actors that really embrace slapstick, and slapstick is a very large part of their comedy. It's indicative of how popular slapstick was, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s.
In fact, Gar, if you go back and you watch many of the episodes of Three's Company, you look at what John Ritter, Norman Fell did as Mr. Roper, like those faces. He look into and from what I understand, that was just something he started doing kind of on his own. And when they seen the way the audience reacted, like to him rolling his eyes and making those faces, even Don Knotts as Ralph Furley do the same type of thing. He'd make these kind of weird faces, and it was not something that was even in the script. They just kind of ad-libbed it, and it became part of the show.
Well, and it's visual humor, which is what slapstick is.
Yeah.
Visual humor, only the elite comedians can do visual humor. That's how hard it is.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if anybody could do it, then it wouldn't be such a big deal.
Yeah, and
visual humor is a very difficult thing to do. To do something, and to know exactly how you're actually making it visually come across has everything to do with how funny it's going to be.
Which is one of the.
You know what I mean?
Which is one of the. Yeah.
It's guys like Don Knotts, that really are masters of it.
Which is
He's not just good at it. The guy was a master at it.
Which is why one of the things I enjoy about doing our episodes, Gar, is going back and kind of seeing how things have transitioned, in media and making films. And I mean, a lot of these comedians, for example, like we talked about, the classic ones like, Lucille Ball, Jerry Lewis, a lot of these guys got their start, on the radio doing comedy. So it's one thing to kind of be on the radio and telling these jokes over there. People hear what people are saying, and they get a good giggle, they get a good laugh. But then, when you get to the point where, okay, they go from, maybe these people transition from being on the radio to making TV shows and movies. I mean, even somebody like Don Knotts, like you say, it's one thing to tell a joke on the radio or have a stand-up comedy show, but then you're on TV and you start doing these things with your face, the physical comedy, as you're saying, and people react to it because now not only can they hear you tell a joke, now they can see what you're doing, and it adds a whole another dimension to what is being done.
Well, what you just described is the transition, of one into another.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that was a natural transition that wound up happening.
Oh, sure. And now in today's episode, we get to the part of a Woody Woodpecker story, like so many other things. Once something becomes, really successful, other people want to get a piece of it. And so we're part of a story now in 1947. Contracts are negotiations start between Walter Lantz and Universal Studios. They're trying to renew their contract, but at this point, it says that they didn't renew their contract because part of the reason is Universal was demanding that Walter Lantz allow them to own the rights to all his to Woody Woodpecker especially, and all his characters. Own the rights to merchandise that stuff, and you can imagine how much money he would have lost. He's like, I'm not signing away the rights to that. So they ended up kind of parting ways, and he ended up at that point having United Artists distribute his cartoons in the theaters.
Well, and rightly so, because there was that's also a situation that happened on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
People were developing characters that became
iconic,
popular on the show, and then they would wind up leaving Saturday Night Live and then doing movies. With those characters, and eventually Saturday Night Live did the same thing that Universal was trying to do to Walter Lantz. They made all new artists that were signed to the show If they created a character that was on the show, Saturday Night Live had the rights to that character. And if you notice, you don't see people leaving Saturday Night Live now, and continuing on with the characters that they were doing on the show. So that's a distinct thing. That, the situation that happened with Walter Lantz and his decision to go to United Artists wasn't just the first time that's ever happened.
Oh no! And what's interesting, I was reading once he went with United Artists. Here's an interesting fact: that the cartoons featured higher quality animation, but the budget remained the same.
Yeah, the budget remained the same.
Yeah.
To me, if you're going to do that, really, if you should be throwing a higher dollar number at Walter Lantz. If you want to take over all of his characters and have the rights to those characters, then they should have been offering Walter Lantz a lot more money.
But what I think is funny about when he went with United Artists, they were producing apparently through United Artists, making higher quality, cartoons, but it cost the same. So business wise, it was a good deal for him because he was putting out a better product, but it wasn't costing him anymore.
No, it wasn't costing him anymore, and like that's what I was kind of getting at is Universal Studios. That whole move that they did was just purely out of greed.
Yeah, and then also in 1947, Woody Woodpecker got his own theme song, which is a very big deal, But Woody Woodpecker's theme song was nominated again for an Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1948. Due to the popularity of the song, Woody Woodpecker fan. So again, once Woody Woodpecker gets his own theme song, when I was reading, all of a sudden, again, you got to remember it's 1947. Woody Woodpecker at this time has been around for 7 years. He's got his own theme song now. And once they get a theme song, people start tuning in more. It becomes even more popular that at this point, Woody Woodpecker fan clubs start popping up. And then what I was reading, if you can believe this, Gar, at this point, not only are fan clubs starting up, but girls and boys are starting to go and get their hair cut like Woody.
That's what the public always does. They mimic their favorites, whether it be a cartoon character or whether it be an actor or an actress. Back in the 80s, I remember Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the movie. Had, they were talking in a scene in this movie about that at school. They had two high school students that looked like Pat Benatar. And I remember when I went to high school, there were people that I went to high school that looked, took on the look of a famous person. So for many, many decades, I've seen it so many over the years where, whenever the public has a favorite, then of that particular person's fans, then the fans want to mimic their favorite. It becomes by that act. Now it becomes a community.
Yeah. In fact, at one point, United Artists got to the point where they weren't paying Walter Lantz what he was once getting paid to feature these cartoons in the theater. So eventually they stopped showing the Woody Woodpecker cartoons in the theater. And kind of the next era of Woody Woodpecker would be the fact that the Woody Woodpecker cartoons were first broadcast on TV in 1957 as the Woody Woodpecker Show. So at this point they have all these cartoons they've made, and they're like, okay, we're going to put this on TV. And what they would do is Walter Lantz himself, he would live from his studio, I guess. He would film like extra footage with Woody and some of the cartoon characters, and they would show some of the different cartoons. But it was called the Woody Woodpecker Show. So Woody Woodpecker was kind of the featured star of a Woody Woodpecker Show, and they'd show some of his other cartoons and kind of between each cartoon he would show like maybe how he drew Woody Woodpecker and stuff like that. And so it became more of a show like that, and they were showing it on TV. And so they did that, I think I was reading until like 1972.
Well, by doing things like that, kind of giving little snapshots of behind the scenes, inspires new people to want to start doing that, as their goal, as what they want to do for a living. You know what I mean? So, for me, I think it's a very generous thing that he was doing by giving those inside looks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I guess they continued. I guess they continued from what I was reading, making new Woody cartoons up until 1972. But at that point, they were kind of forced to close down Walter Lantz studio, because at that point the cartoons were getting too expensive to make. And so he kind of closed up shop in 1972. But again, as we sit here and do this episode today, Woody Woodpecker is like 84 years old, if you can believe that, Gar. So for the last 84 years, Woody Woodpecker has meant something to so many people.
Well, the bottom line, Woody Woodpecker became so popular that it has its own star on the
Hollywood. Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
And it's really, that is a huge indicator of how worldly, not just in the United States, but worldly popular that one character became.
Yeah.
We marvel at aspects of his cartoon became up for Academy Awards, and we marvel at all of these
things,
achievements, and the fact that his studio was one of the first of the transitional studios from the big screen to the TV and all of these things. But the real one cherry on top that really gives you the indication of how high of an achievement Woody Woodpecker is the fact that he's got that star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Yeah,
every person that you see, whether you recognize their name or not, when you're walking down Hollywood Boulevard, every single one of those people, whether you know who they are or not, are extremely high achievers.
Yeah, in high regard. And another, because again, you make the point, and I could be wrong here, but to my knowledge, I think the only other cartoon character that I'm aware has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is Bugs Bunny. So that kind of tells you, what kind of company Woody Woodpecker is in. Both legendary cartoon characters, and another sign that I thought was interesting, that kind of Woody Woodpecker kind of his place in not just pop culture but in history, is that we did an episode on the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade a couple years back, and I was reading that Woody Woodpecker was actually featured as one of the balloons in the 1982 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. So again, that kind of shows you Woody's place in history.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Things like that don't happen
every day. Yeah.
Right.
And before we wrap it up today, Gar, as we so like to do, I found a lot of fun facts, kind of just to kind of give people an idea of what was going on in the world in 1940 when Woody Woodpecker first came on the scene. Okay, what was going on in the world in 1940? Get this, Gar. FM radio, which we kind of take for granted because how long have you been listening to AM and FM radio? But FM radio was demonstrated to the Federal Communication Commissions for the very first time on January 5th, 1940.
Well, that's the technology technology that that has been around
for years,
all these years, and now we're watching it wane. I don't think that radio will ever completely die.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The popular, I think the height of popularity of radio was the 80s.
And
I don't think radio will ever have that kind of popularity ever again.
Yeah.
And it's sad because it just holds such a warm place in my heart and such great memories of how in the 80s the radio was the soundtrack to our lives.
Yeah, that's how you got turned on to a lot of the music that we grew up on. And also in 1940, for all you history buffs, just in case you were wondering, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the President of the United States.
Yes.
And again, I thought this was a real fun fact, doing the Woody Woodpecker as an animated character. On February 7th, 1940, the second full-length animated Walt Disney movie was released. Can you guess what it was, Gar?
What?
Pinocchio. I mean, think about it. Pinocchio goes all the way back to 1940. And again, I'm pretty impressed with that because I got it in my DVD collection somewhere here. But to think that film goes all the way back to 1940, and Woody Woodpecker, Pinocchio kind of premiere the same year. It's just amazing. They go from films and stuff being black and white from the 1930s. You go into the 1940s, and stuff is now colorized. It's just the transition, I think, of that kind of stuff is amazing. It baffles my mind. It said also, February 21st, 1940, actress Hattie McDaniel becomes the first African American to win an Academy Award for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind.
Yep. And if anybody's seen Gone with the Wind,
yeah.
It really, by today's standards, most people, Gone with the Wind is a faded thing. But Gone with the Wind, when the movie came out and first came out and everything like that, Gone with the Wind was considered one of the greatest movies ever made.
Sure.
And when even today, because the movie's a long movie, because it has a huge story to tell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Such a huge story to tell. But if you have that kind of time, to watch the movie, when you watch the movie, you'll understand why it was considered one of the greatest movies ever made. Because it really kind of captures, the shock.
The shock value,
of war, because war movies of that time period glorified war. Because the reason why they glorified war is because war movies during that time period were to get people, inspire young men to join the fight against the evils of the world. Recruitment.
Yeah.
War movies were made as recruitment. And Gone with the Wind was the only movie of that time that depicted the shock of what war really is. Because everything that was, depicted in recruitment style films glorified it and only didn't show the ugly side and the dirty side and the shocking side of war. But Gone with the Wind did. It was the only movie of that time that showed the shock of war.
And I think that's why all these years later, people have reacted to the film the way they have. But I think the fact that it succeeded and kind of having that shock value of what really goes on in war. I mean, that to me is a great film. But if you can accomplish that, you know.
Yeah. You know, I mean, and I remember seeing the scenes where they were, you know, and because all the war movies I had seen during, you know, the same time period, I remember seeing that scene, and I remember how shocked I was.
Yeah, very much like if you...
Because up until then, I had never knew
about that
side.
Yeah,
of war.
And in fact, very much like if you ever seen Schindler's List, you know, even though Spielberg made the film, I mean, many years after the Holocaust takes place, anybody's seen that movie, it's like, you see that movie, you feel like you were there. That's great filmmaking, you know.
You know, for me, I never watched that movie. You know, not because I don't want to know about that time period, but I didn't watch that movie because I do know about that.
You do know about that, yeah.
And I do know about those atrocities. Yeah. And for me, I didn't want...
You didn't want to be reminded.
No, it's not that I didn't want to be reminded. I already appreciated the horrors of those kind of acts.
Wow.
And the horrors of that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I didn't want to subject myself to the horrors of people that would do those kind of things to other people. I'm with you there. I'm with you there. I just did not want to subject myself to those kind of horrors.
I'm with you there, my friend. And you know, the last thing we're going to wrap this up with, November 30th, 1940, also was when Lucille Ball marries Desi Arnaz. And I bring that up because, of course, we'd done a couple episodes on Lucille Ball last year. We did one on the movie they made together, the long trailer. If people want to check out that's a fun episode we did. We also did an episode on I Love Lucy, and also on her radio show, which was called My Favorite Husband, which Gar and I found out accidentally doing the episode on I Love Lucy. Come to find out that the radio show that we'd never heard of, My Favorite Husband, was what kind of actually they got the idea for I Love Lucy. So that's a fun little episode to check out if you guys want. And Gar, as always, this was just so much fun. And I would just say, hey, you know, Gar, you really, you kind of, I think, got that Woody personality to me. Even your laugh right there, it's infectious. Talking to you, I enjoy doing these episodes with you, my friend. And just to let people know, when we do this in 2 weeks, again, we're going to be talking about the original, talking about old time radio, as we just did with My Favorite Husband. We're going to talk about the old time radio show Dragnet, and we're going to do this real quick to let people know because, of course, we're aware of the Dragnet movies. There used to be in the 60s a Dragnet TV show, but in doing research of this, come to find out before any of that ever took place, like a lot of things, Dragnet was on the radio. And if you go on YouTube, you can come across some of these old time radio shows, and they're fun to listen back to. And so it's kind of fun to think, okay, wow, before it was ever a Dragnet TV show, it was a Dragnet radio show. And then even later you kind of realize, okay, this is what it was like to hear it on the radio, and then all of a sudden there's a TV show. So we're going to be talking about that. Gar, anything else you want to say to everybody?
I just wanted to say thank you to anybody that chooses to listen to this show is hugely appreciated.
Yes, you guys are.
And I think I can speak for you too.
Sure.
We hope that we are doing a really good job, you know, in doing the show and putting it out there, and just, you know, thank you to the people that listen to this, and thank you to you, Jason, for recognizing when years ago, when we were just doing interviews
on music,
and you were realizing that, hey, you know, this is kind of taking a life of its own in the pop culture area, and maybe we should recognize that and do a show. Well, thank you, Jason, for recognizing that and deciding that is something that we should start pursuing.
And I think it's been successful for that reason, Gar, because I realize there's so much more to talk about. And I think since it's kind of morphed into Gar Borras' Time Machine, what we were originally doing, that's what's made it so much fun. People tune in and they don't really know if we're going to be talking about a movie or a favorite album or a classic TV show. And it makes it that much more fun for us because we stumble across so much stuff. Like, we were doing one episode and we find out something about Get Smart. And so we we got to do an episode on that. We finally did an episode on Get Smart. And so it's just so much fun doing this with you, Gar. If you could hold on, Gar, I'd like to talk to you off there. Thanks again, everybody. And this will be going up next Saturday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.